Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Today I am doing my August wrap up, in which I read 7 books, which isn't that many for me, but I had quite an eventful August, and so I did spend quite a few weekends not reading. So yeah, 7, which is still not bad at all, just a few less than I normally read. And August was Women in Translation Month, so initially I created my monthly TBR basket, which is what I do at the beginning of every month on Instagram, and then I decided to scrap the basket and instead just read all of the Women in Translation books that were on my shelf that I hadn't read. And I had about 10 of them, so it seemed like a perfect number, plus I think 2 were already in that basket, so I didn't have to completely scrap the original TBR, but then I just found the 10 that were on my shelf that I hadn't read and tried to read as many as I can. So I read 6 in the end, because one of these on the list was from my book club instead of from Women in Translation. So yeah, it was a really good month overall, and it was really cool to be reading from around the world, translated from lots of different languages and set in lots of different countries. And so I'm going to do something a little bit different for this video. Instead of talking about them in the order that I read them, which is what I normally do, I'm going to kind of rank them. So I'm going to go from the one I least enjoyed to the one I most enjoyed and tell you about all of them. Like I said, I did read one for my book club, so I'm going to do that one first, and then I will dive into the Women in Translation reads. So let's get going. Okay, so this month's pick for Amy's book club was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This is set in San Francisco. Oh my god, I've already forgotten. I want to say San Francisco. I'm pretty sure it is San Francisco, and it's set in the 1950s, and I'd heard very good things about it. I was very excited. It is a sapphic read. It's sort of young adult, I think on the cusp of new adult, because the protagonist is 16, 17. A lot of the themes do feel a little bit adult, so somewhere in between those two, and yeah, I was very excited. So our protagonist is Lily. She lives in Chinatown. She is Chinese American, and the book is essentially about her exploring her identity along with a lot of other sort of events that occur throughout the time that we are with her. Now the narrative is a little bit different in that we have Lily in the 1950s, and then we also have these chapters that flash back, and those chapters aren't from Lily's point of view, they're from various other people's point of view. I think all of her family members, so her mum, her dad, and then I think her aunt. So they flash back various number of years in time to give us a bit more context about Lily's story and her family, and yeah, everything about what's going on at the time. Now, I really enjoyed the book. It was quite fast-paced, it was quite easy to read, definitely didn't take me long to read, and there were so many really nice kind of moments in there. The relationship that Lily has with her friend slash love interest Kath is really lovely. I loved everything that happened there. I loved the build up to it. I loved the way that they kind of explored their identity and sexuality with each other, and like the things they both allowed the other ones to explore in like the safe space of each other. It was really lovely, and because it's called Last Night in the Telegraph Club, the venue, the Telegraph Club, plays quite a big role in the book. However, one thing that a lot of the people in my book club agreed on is, because of this title, I think we were expecting more of the Telegraph Club, and the Telegraph Club was definitely one of the best points of the book. It felt really cool inside. It was like a really immersive description, so you really felt like you were in this club, and the performances again felt really immersive. They were really descriptive. It was really cool, and we loved it, but I think it only actually appears about 3 times in the whole book, so it was a bit disappointing that we didn't get more of that. So yeah, all of those elements I really loved. There's a lot of other queer characters in the story, and it was really great because all of them aren't like stereotyped just into one box, so they kind of explore a lot of different like queer identities, and like all of that element of the book I really loved. But overall I didn't love the book. I liked it, I didn't love it. I think I gave it about 3.5 stars, and the reason for that is a couple of things. Firstly, these flashbacks that happened, I obviously won't tell you what happens in the story, but they just didn't really come to any kind of head, and I was a bit confused about why they were there and the point of them. And for me personally, I just felt like they could have been removed and this book would have been exactly the same, and if anything they could have been replaced with more of the stuff I wanted, like the Telegraph Club, like Lily and Kath's relationship, and I would have preferred it as a book, because these flashbacks just didn't really play any kind of important role for me, and I just didn't get the point of them. And then the other element to it is communism, which comes up quite a lot in the book because it's set in the 1950s in America, and it does come up a fair amount. And similarly to the flashback chapters, again, it didn't really go anywhere. Like, it was mentioned a lot, and so I was kind of waiting for this big moment, this like reveal or this like big event, and it never happened. And so it kind of felt a bit lackluster in that respect. And because there were parts of the book I really loved, it just felt a shame that we couldn't focus on those bits more. So yeah, overall, I did enjoy the writing and the story, and it was an easy book to read, but 3.5 stars because there were just too many disappointing parts of it. Okay, now we're going to go into the Women in Translation reads, and like I said, I'm going to go from the ones I least enjoyed to the ones I most enjoyed. So first up is Notes of a Crocodile by Chu Miao-jin. This is set in Taiwan and it is translated from Chinese. Now, unfortunately, I DNF'd this book, and you know what? I made it quite far. I made it almost halfway, or maybe just over halfway through the book, so I really did try, but it got to a point where I just wasn't enjoying it at all. I was really forcing myself to pick it up. I mean, for like such a short book, it's 230 pages, and I think it took me a week to read the first 115, so it was clearly proof that I just wasn't reaching for it. I didn't want to pick it up. I couldn't be bothered to continue reading it, which was a shame because I was really excited about it. But I think ultimately the themes and the narrative structure and like the choices that the author made, they all just went over my head. Like, I just wasn't in a space where I could really like properly get into it or understand what was going on or really appreciate what the author was trying to do, which is a shame, but just is what it is. So like I said, set in Taiwan, and it is mainly set around this like group of students, queer students, about them kind of exploring their identity, being students, living their lives. Now, where it starts to get a bit tricky is the narrator is anonymous. Fine, had that plenty of times in books, but the way that the narrator chooses to like talk about the story is very confusing. Like the perspective is not straightforward. We know that she is a lesbian, and as far as I got in the story, she is sort of pursuing this other girl in the group. And then there's this idea of the crocodile that comes about, and honestly, I really can't tell you much more than that because I just could not grasp it. I really couldn't grasp it. I struggle a lot with like complex literature anyway. Like, generally speaking, I like easy to digest books because I want to be enjoying them. I want to be having a good time. If I have to work for them, normally they're not my cup of tea. I won't continue, and that is what happened here. If you have read it, please feel free to dive into my DMs and let me know what you thought, because I would love to discuss it. I would love to try and understand it, and then perhaps maybe I could pick it up again in the future. Similarly to when I spoke about 100 Years of Solitude, I think this is another good example of a book that will be really fascinating to properly like digest and pick apart in, say, like a seminar or at university, where other people can help me understand it. And I think in that sense I would be able to enjoy it, but on my own, just trying to read this in my spare time, yeah, not for me. So I did DNF it, so I haven't really given it a rating. I don't really feel like I can rate it because I didn't finish it. Next up is The Mermaid's Tale by Li Wei-jing. This also is set in Taiwan and translated from Chinese. A massive coincidence because I've also never read a book set in Taiwan before this month, so I don't know why that happened, but it did. And this is, as you probably can tell from the cover, mainly about ballroom dancing. So it surrounds our protagonist, who is called Summer. She lives on her own and she finds a passion in learning how to ballroom dance. She's a bit kind of older, so it's not something she's ever going to be able to do as like a career, but she still wants to be able to compete, and she still wants to be able to enjoy this thing that she has found a passion for. Now, there were quite a few elements of the book I really liked, but I think overall what I enjoyed about it is it kind of had like a melancholic feel to it, a melancholic atmosphere running through it. And actually, after reading the author's note at the end, I learnt that the author actually wrote this while she was diagnosed with cancer, and she ended up dying, and this was actually published, I think, by her sister. So I think knowing that, it does kind of give the book itself a whole different perspective. And a lot of the themes that run throughout the book is kind of like wondering whether you have fulfilled your purpose in life, wondering whether you have done all the things you were supposed to with the time that you had. And I really loved that element of it and how it explored it. And yeah, overall I think that was really cool. And then just really cool that there's a lot about ballroom dancing as well, like a lot of like the different styles and the steps and the technique and the real hard work that goes into being able to hone this kind of hobby. So yeah, really liked it. If you're looking for something that's got like a bit of a different theme, obviously if you're looking for something that's a translation, then it does tick all of those boxes, and I would really recommend reading. I don't actually think it's the author's note because I don't think the author wrote it, but oh, translator's note, that's it. And then I think at the end there might be something else that I read about the author dying before this was published. But yeah, overall really fascinating. To be honest, I've jumped straight from a DNF into all of the other books, which I actually quite enjoyed. So I gave this one 4 stars. Up next is The Invisible Life of Eurydice, which is, I think, how you say it in Spanish. I would say that as like Eurydice, like it is in Greek mythology, but I was listening to the audiobook of this and I think it's like Eurydice. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation, but The Invisible Life of Eurydice Gusmao, and this is translated from Spanish and it is set in Brazil. It's a historical fiction because it's set in the 1940s, and honestly I really liked this. Like I said, the rest of the books, after the Notes of a Crocodile, the rest of the books really go uphill, so very happy about that. So yeah, set in Brazil, set in the 1940s, and honestly it mainly explores sort of like the women's place in society, in life at that time. So Eurydice, oh, I think I'm getting worse. I'm so sorry. She's our protagonist, and also we follow a lot about her sister as well, but it's like the two of them going through their childhood into adulthood, like marrying their husbands and what happens to them in their life. Now, if you really like lessons of chemistry, it feels like a bit of a rogue recommendation. If you like lessons in chemistry, I think you will really like this as well, because what I really liked about it is what it said about the women's place in the world, but how it did it is really cool. So it was basically a sort of dark comedy. There's a lot of quite dark humour in it, so if you don't like that, probably not for you, but I do really like that, and I thought it was a really different way to approach like the topic and the story, but ultimately really showing how like women can hold a lot of the power, how women are amazing and incredible and can be obviously just as smart, as intelligent as the men, and they're capable of so much more than they were given credit for in the 1940s. So yeah, so many cool parts to it. Lessons in chemistry again comes back because there's a whole section at the beginning where it's talking about like recipes and writing a recipe book, and that really reminded me of lessons in chemistry, you know, how that isn't just about cooking, it's about science, and you have to be quite skilled to be able to pull all of that off. So yeah, again, harping back to that, so many really cool characters that I really loved. Like I said, the main character, her sister, there's also some their respective husbands, their families. There's a lot of characters involved in it, but overall like the culmination of the eclectic mix of characters is really perfect. Dark humour and the feminist take that the novel takes is really brilliant, so I would highly recommend this, and I gave it 4.5 stars, I think. Okay, next is Minor Detail by Adina Shibli, and this is translated from Arabic and set in Israel/Palestine, but mainly Israel. This is a really short read. As you can see, it's a Fitz-Carlado edition. I've got a couple of these, and this one, yeah, is really short. I think it's just over 100 pages, 112 pages, so it is a pretty quick read. Now, this is set into 2 parts, and that's quite important, and I think if you're going to read it, you need to know this context, because the first part was just a bit bizarre. So it mainly focuses on this guy that is stationed in the desert. I think he's like a soldier. He's stationed in the desert and he gets bitten by a spider, and it is basically him trying to hide this bite and treat this bite himself while becoming quite delusional from the effects of the bite, and the repercussions that has, and also what he witnesses while he's stationed in the desert in this place. That sounds really weird, because it is weird, and I was reading this like, what on earth is this? I don't understand. Like, it didn't seem to be going anywhere. It was just descriptions of this guy and this spider bite, and I was like, this isn't a story. What is this supposed to be doing? But then we move on to part 2, which has much more of like a normal narrative structure to it, and it is about a woman who is researching the history of the area. Now, the second part is set further in time, and she is researching the history of the area where the soldier was stationed. So that bit is a bit more easy to follow, and all I will say, because it is quite hard, it's a 100-page book, it's quite hard not to give you spoilers, but all I'll say is that if you are like 75-80% of the way in and you're still not convinced, just wait, because genuinely I think it was about page 95, so like 10 pages from the end, that I was like, oh, okay, I get this now, I understand, and it all started falling into place, which is a really brilliant moment. But yeah, I think that was really good, and as you get through part 2, the pacing really picks up, and I think that helps with the story. So all I'll say say is that if you are going to read this, just get through part 1. Just read part 1 and just try and appreciate it for what it is. It's only like 40-50 pages, so it's not that long, but just get through that, because I don't think that's going to convince you to love this book. But when you get to part 2, the pacing picks up, you'll realise why everything's connected, and then you will really enjoy the book. So yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really brilliant way to write a short book. It's really punchy, and I would definitely recommend it. I'll give it 4.5 stars as well, because we are obviously moving through from worst to best. Okay, 2 more, and a very familiar novel, I'm sure, to everybody, and that is A Long Petal of the Sea by Elisabeth Allende. This is translated from Spanish and is set in Spain, Chile, a little bit in France, mainly in Chile to be honest, but we're a bit all over the place. So this is set in the early 20th century, and it spans quite a lot of periods of time. We kind of join the characters at the end of the Spanish Civil War. So our main characters, although the book doesn't really feel like it has 1 or even 2 main characters, I have quite a lot of main characters, but anyway, they are exiled from Spain to Chile to try and escape what is happening in Spain. So the beginning of the book is basically their journey through the countries to try and get to Chile, and we see that from lots of different points of views. There's, like I said, there's not really one protagonist. We not only see the story from lots of different points of view, but we see it from a lot of different like people who hold different statuses, so from like different class levels, and how the current situation in Chile and Spain is affecting them in different ways based on how much money they have and what status they hold, and that was really interesting. It's also really interesting because there's just a lot of like really family based dynamics and situations that happen in the book, things like marriages, romances, affairs, inheritance, death, marriage, I think I said that already, lots of different things like that which kind of seem mundane, but given the context of what's happening in the world at the same time, I think it puts a whole different perspective on it. Obviously, if you have heard of this book or you've read this book, you'll know that there is just really beautiful writing. It's like, it feels really epic. It was just a really engrossing story that really kept me completely entranced throughout. I would happily read more of her books, and I now understand why she is so popular, because yeah, it was really beautiful, it was really fascinating, it was really well told, and I was just in love with all of the characters. I was really invested in all of their stories, and I really wanted to know what happened. So if that doesn't tell you that you should read the book, I don't know what does. So again, I'll give this 4.5 stars because I'm saving my 5-star. I can give more books 5 stars, but let's, for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to say 4.5 stars because I'm saving my 5-star for the last book. And our last book is The Murmur of Fees by Sofia Segovia. Now, I've also just realised I haven't been telling you who they're translated by. This is Simon Bruni. I'll put that in the description so you can see who translated all of the books. Normally it is on the covers of a lot of them, but I'll put it in the description as well so you can see. Now, I loved this book. What this month has taught me is that I really enjoy translated historical fiction. I don't know why. I think it might be because you kind of get to learn about the history of that country because you're reading a translated book. So it probably isn't set in the country that you live in, i.e. for me the UK. It is set in all other countries, and you do get to learn a lot more about what happened there, what the like people had to go through at certain points in history. And I think that is really captivating. So I really, really loved that. And that I think is part of the reason why I loved this so much. So this, again, similar to A Long Petal of the Sea, doesn't really have one main character. It has quite a few different characters, but if you had to pick a main character, it is a boy called Simona Pio. Now, he is found under a bridge when he is a baby. He's been abandoned there, and he is covered in a blanket of live bees. Now, please suspend your disbelief. This book really explores magical realism. If, like me, you are not the biggest fan of magical realism, because I've read other books that are magical realism and I've just been confused. But I think this is a really great book to dip your toes into the genre, because the only real magical realism that happens is this blanket of bees over Simona Pio. Now, these bees kind of live with him throughout his whole life. He can sort of control them, but they're very loyal to him. But yeah, you kind of forget they're there, to be honest, but they do play quite an important role in the book as well. So that's that's where you kind of have to, like I said, suspend your disbelief, and that's where the magical realism comes in. Otherwise, this is very much just a historical fiction. So like I said, Simone Pio is found under this bridge covered in live bees, and he's also disfigured, and a lot of the town say that he's been kissed by the devil. So he's already a little bit of an outcast, even as a baby. Now he is taken in by Francisco and Beatrice Morales, I think their name is Morales, who are a couple that live on a farm or own a farm, and they take him in. And essentially the book is about Simone Pio's childhood and life. I think by the time the novel ends, he's maybe a teenager. So it spans 20-ish years, just under 20-ish years. So it spans quite a lot of time, and it is essentially just what happens to Simone Pio and the town throughout that time. Now this is set in the early 20th century, and a lot of the novel focuses on the Spanish flu. The narratives through that are really interesting. Like I said at the beginning, really interesting to learn about what happened during that time, and although this is fiction, it's obviously based on history, and just to see how people had to deal with that. And also knowing what has happened with COVID, it's even more fascinating because just the way that people dismissed things, and obviously we're at a time where healthcare is not nearly as sophisticated as it is now, so people are dying very quickly from flu-like symptoms. So yeah, really interesting, that part of it. Then the other part that I thought makes this book really incredible is the pacing. Now you have to take my word for this because it takes a little while to sort of really see it come to fruition in the book, but the pacing is done really cleverly. So the way that the author writes it is that one chapter will end in a cliffhanger. So something big will happen, and just as it's about to either happen or just as we're about to see the consequences of that action, a new chapter begins, and rather than following immediately on from that event, it will skip forward in time. So we can generally see who survived that event, whose fault it was, who's being punished for it, and then the following chapter will go back and show us what actually happened during the event. Now that might sound a bit weird, that might sound a bit like, well, why would I want to know what happened when I already know who survived? But you will have to just take my word for the fact that the pacing of it means that you just keep getting through the pages because you really want to know what happened. Even though you already know the outcome, you still want to know the details of the events, and a lot of those details are kind of important, so you do still want to know what happened during the event, even if we already know who survived or what happened. That sounds a bit vague, but I obviously can't give you actual examples because that will spoil the book. But overall, like I said, Simone Pio, really beautiful, loved him as a character. He is mute for most of the book, so he's kind of this enigma. Like I said, a lot of people stay away from him because he's disfigured and covered in bees, and everybody doesn't really understand him or want to understand him, let alone go near him or get to know him. And because he's mute, he does struggle to communicate with people, and we kind of see that frustration and see how he forms relationships with people despite the fact he doesn't talk. So love Simone Pio as a character. He is really one of the biggest allures of this book, but also the pacing's brilliant. Just everything that happens is quite chunky. I think it's 460 pages, so a little bit chunkier than I would normally read, to be honest. But yes, so much happens, so many characters that you will love and hate in equal measure, and you will love Simone Pio as well. So easily a 5-star read, and I can imagine that this will probably be one of my favourite reads of the year as well. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. So yeah, I think even though I DNF'd one book and I didn't love my book club pick, the rest of the books actually were really good and have really made me love translated fiction even more than I already did. It was also really great just to explore books that were set in different countries, were written in different languages, and really again just reaffirm my appreciation for being able to tell these stories in translation, and really loving that. So please, if you haven't recently, if you can look at the books you've read recently and realise that none of them have been translated, then please try and pick up a translated book soon, because it's a really great way to encourage the publishing industry to keep translating books from other languages. Yeah, so it's really great. So yeah, I had a really good month. I'll probably end up reading more next month, but you can find that out in my September wrap up. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye!